10 years ago, in 2013, I took a mandatory computer class in school where I learned to develop games. And I bet you're wondering, how did I go from making games that look like this to working as a professional game developer making games that look like this? Well, let me take you on my game dev journey through the epic highs and lows of college football and hopefully inspire you to continue or even pursue your own creative journey. Games for me have always been a way to connect. Some of my earliest memories were watching my family play Super Mario 64 or Mario Party, and these fond memories, especially the longer time goes on, have become more meaningful to me. And my goal for being a game developer is to bring this to the next generation. I want people to think back at something that I created with the same fondness that I got from games that I played when I was younger. So, to truly start the story, I need to take you back to the spring of 2013, where a young 14-year-old Garnet was introduced to Scratch. Scratch is a visual scripting tool using cutting-edge drag-and-drop technology tailored to teaching kids about programming. The class started super simple with basic input and eventually progressed into actually making a game of our choice. Now, being an impressionable teen, the games we decided to make were heavily inspired by popular games of that time, namely for me being Head Soccer, which is a perfect time to plug a video of mine where I recreated the game that I made 10 years later. Anyway, so I remade this game with a friend, and as jank as it was, I did really well in this class and was actually ranked first, so you'd think my passion for game development would continue from there, but there was a different reality. I've always been a fan of all things media, and my true passion at the time was film. So while I was in school, I focused on making short films with my friends. And looking back, I have no regrets about that. I loved making them, and I'm really glad that they exist for me to forever look back on. But that's a story for some other time. After a short stint in the game development world, for the next 2 years, I completely stopped. It wasn't until my senior years of school in 2016 and 2017 where I took a software elective that I was reintroduced to programming and game development, this time in the form of Unity. Now again, being an impressionable teen, the games that I made were pretty much just me recreating my favorite games of the time, which were Lisa and The Binding of Isaac. And although the games I made during these classes were critically acclaimed, scoring 100% on Metacritic, my deepest secret is they were all just tutorial clones. I watched tutorials and just copied from them, and honestly there's no shame in that. But as far as being a programmer goes, well, it would be a stretch to have called me a programmer. I had no idea what I was doing. Character movement, game design, nothing. But everyone starts somewhere, and for me, that was here. Now, similar to the itch that I needed to create short films, I created games not for myself, but for the entertainment and enjoyment of me and my friends. So I often littered them with references of us or things that we found funny at the time. Now these games will always serve a special place in my heart as they're a constant reminder of where I started in the industry and the growth that is possible for anyone. So that takes us to the end of 2017 where I was finishing up my schooling. During this time I was representing Australia internationally in figure skating, and my schoolwork actually took a huge hit as a result. My priorities were all out of whack and I had no direction. I had no idea what I wanted to do with myself after school. Once I finished school, I was extremely discouraged. The path for me always seemed like university, but that just wasn't gonna happen. And where it looked like everyone around me was succeeding and going off to do their own thing, I was stuck in a hole. I remember at the start of 2018, I thought to myself, I need a goal. I need something to aim for. I read in a university handbook about a course that had just been revamped, the Bachelor of Science in Games Development at the University of Technology, Sydney. There were two things here that stood out to me: game development and this particular university. I really loved the idea of going to UTS, and when thinking back on my schooling, even though I was horrible at it, I really enjoyed making games. So I kind of decided then and there that that's what I wanted to do. Now, as I mentioned, I didn't immediately get into university as I flunked the end of high school, but I was signed up to do a bridging course that could potentially get me into university. So I grinded that year hard, keeping this goal of studying game development in the back of my mind, and fortunately by the end of the bridging course, I received an offer to do the Bachelor of Science in Games Development, which takes us to 2019, where I began my undergraduate degree in game development, and really the proper start of my game development career. Now, 2019 was a slow start. I was a first year uni student, so the first semester was just the introductory subjects. It was the spring of 2019 where I was actually able to take my first game dev subject, Introduction to Computer Game Development. Now this was an interesting subject because it was catered to the me of the class who fundamentally had no programming experience. Each week there was a lab task with a series of instructions on what to do. Now the instructions were extremely broken down. I mean, really broken down. So it shouldn't have been hard to get marks in this subject, right? Well, that's what I thought. But I struggled. I couldn't understand the variables, methods, functions, classes. None of it made sense, and I was really getting discouraged. Tutorials weren't helping, there wasn't any ChatGPT to explain what code was doing. I was helpless. And to top it off, a memory I have was being in a different class, and there were some guys sitting near me who also took the game dev subject, and they were literally just sitting at their desk coding. And seeing that, sort of seeing them know what they were doing and feeling like I needed to compare myself to them made me feel a lot worse than I already did by this point. So this game subject required us to remake an arcade game and then add our own twist to it. I stupidly decided to choose Tetris, but honestly, out of all the options I had, I would have struggled through them all. So I was back to my good friend Tutorial Hell, where I basically copied line for line a how to make Tetris in Unity tutorial that I found on YouTube. So my twist on the game was basically every Tetramino would alter the game in some way if it was destroyed. And this was completely designed by me, but I had no idea what I was coding. I looked at the code that was set up in the tutorial and sort of forced something to work. And you might think that this was sufficient, but post submission of this assignment, I actually received a notification from the university that I was being investigated for academic misconduct because all of my code was found online from the tutorial that I copied line for line. So I was shitting myself during this time, and I basically came to terms with failing and already started looking at alternative courses because I was convinced game development wasn't meant for me. Now, thankfully they released the investigation but gave me an official warning instead. But again, this was a huge hit to my confidence in game development, and I was at an all-time low. Which brings us to autumn of 2020. First year of uni is down and we're immediately thrown into online uni because of the big COVID. This semester, I would take Introduction to Computer Game Design, which taught us more of the user experience side of game development and understanding player interactions. And this was an amazing subject, and so much that I learned here, even years later, I still remember and apply while designing my own projects. So, the big assignment of this subject was, in a group, to create a game. The aim was to create a game that utilizes unique mechanics that need to be clearly communicated and understood to the player, sort of seamlessly through the gameplay. So, my group came up with Coffee Rush, a fast-paced platformer where you play as player, who's just a little guy that wants his morning coffee, but Ben the Bean Bandit steals your coffee beans, leading you on a chase through the galaxy. The mechanic that I implemented was jump pads, and again, a tale as old as time, I didn't know what I was doing. But thankfully, an online tutorial was there to save me. So, we created Coffee Rush, and although it contains a lot of poorly designed levels, the game itself definitely has a lot of charm to it, and again, it's a great spot for me to look back on in my career. In the spring of 2020, I took my next game subject, Advanced Games Programming, where I was first introduced to Unreal Engine. The subject was taught a lot like the Introduction to Computer Game Development class, with the weekly lab tasks and the big assignment at the end, but the difference that I felt here was that where everyone seemed to be progressing through uni, I still felt like I hadn't learned anything. And that was a genuine debate that I had with myself for a while actually. I'm over halfway through my degree and I couldn't say that I had actually learned anything. I went back and forth with myself on this for a while because, as I said, where it felt like people just got it and I couldn't, I questioned not only my own ability but my worthiness in this industry. I truly thought that I would never understand programming and that I was wasting my time. But every story has a silver lining, and this was actually the beginning of mine. As I said, I was in this battle against myself. I didn't believe that I could do it, but the thing that outweighed my own ability was actually my competitive nature. Almost like a light switch, I told myself that I was here for a reason and that I'm going to prove it to myself that I can do this, not for anyone else. Instead of viewing everyone else's success as a measure of my own failures, I decided to use them as a benchmark for what I wanted to do. If he can create that, then I will too. During this class, we were working on a first-person shooter game, and each week we would build on the project with extra functionality, with the two main assignments being to add extended AI functionality to the game, and to add extended procedural content generation to the game. Now, we were extremely free to interpret these assignments however we wanted, and for both the AI and the content generation, we had a base setup already implemented from the weekly labs. Our job was to expand on it. So I spent that spring literally just understanding how and why these things worked in the labs. The code was there, I just need to figure out what it was doing, and eventually something clicked. The first assignment, extending the AI functionality in the game, I decided to give the AI health, and if their health was low, then they would know to run away from combat and find some potions to heal up. This was the first time that I'd come up with an idea and, without using a tutorial, coded it into the game. And by no means was that code good at all, but it really felt like my code. I knew exactly how and why it worked, and for me, that was one of my greatest achievements in game development. That alone was enough to give me the confidence that I could do anything in programming, even if, looking back now, I was on the top of my many journeys through Mount Stupid. Which takes us into autumn of 2021 with my first university capstone subject, Game Design Studio 1. The aim of this subject was to create a game as a group in a practice studio environment and essentially put all the years of university into one game. But before we could create that game, we had a single solo week-long lab task where we had to recreate the MASH arcade game. This was the first time I had really thought about the end result that I wanted and broke down how I could get there. I broke down the steps a lot more than just this, but even on a base level, this was enough to create the game from, and that's what I did. I built it iteratively. I made the helicopter move, then I picked up the soldiers, then I capped out how many you can hold, then I removed the held soldiers when you were at a hospital, and finally implemented trees and collisions that would kill you. Once I was satisfied with that, I actually thought about how I can make the game more interesting. A concept that I quickly fell in love with from advanced games programming the previous semester was procedural generation. I love the idea of randomization in games, and it was something that I would heavily explore in my career. Now comes the actual capstone project. Now, if you recall, a favorite game of mine back when I was a teenager was Binding of Isaac, a roguelike dungeon crawler. And with my group, all being fans of this genre, especially with the release of Hades not too long beforehand, we collectively wanted to make our own dungeon crawler game. And like that, Thaum was born. Thaum follows Jop, a wizard, imprisoned for practicing magic and your father's magical stones stripped from you. You must escape the stronghold and reclaim your powers that are now being wielded by the evil wardens. This game, even now, will forever hold a special place in my heart. It was the first real test of my own knowledge, pushing my own boundaries and capabilities. And for this project, I was completely in charge of the AI and player abilities in the game. Even looking back, as funnily as I do with this project, the code still wasn't that great, and I hadn't even explored the capabilities of the Unity engine as a whole, but I was actually getting somewhere with game development now. I was coming up with ideas and relying less and less on tutorials. So I ended that semester on a high note with a project that I'm extremely proud of. Feeling motivated going into the winter months and having some time off uni, I wanted to continue my game development skills. When we developed Thaum, an early idea that we had was to have random levels, but due to time constraints and our abilities at the time, we weren't able to achieve that. As I mentioned, I was super inspired by the concepts of procedural generation, and I wanted to see how I would go about creating a map generator that we could use if we ever worked on Thaum again. I explored the random walker algorithm. I did a video on this algorithm too a while back, so if it's interesting for you guys, definitely check that out too. The next game I worked on was with a group of friends from university for a 48-hour game jam. The theme for this jam was change of perspective. We decided on an endless runner where you have to fit the pieces of the wall with the missing pieces that are coming towards you. For this game, I handled the block mechanics for both perspectives, which was pretty much how the blocks would spawn and be interacted with. Again, this was a great learning point as I was starting to develop more complex concepts without the need for tutorials. And as a common theme for this stage in my career, the code was not good, but it was my own. Spring of 2021, my final semester of university with my final ever game subject. Riding on the high of Thaum, my group from the requisite subjects stuck together and decided on a game that we could create together. Due to the success of Thaum, we wanted to create something equally impressive in the technical end and the visual end. But more than that, we wanted to explore our own abilities. As for a lot of us, this would be our final subject at university, so we wanted an impressive piece for our portfolio. This game would end up being Colosseum. Colosseum is a 2.5 dimensional networked arena fighter set in the Roman Colosseum. There's multiple game modes and game types stacked with a procedural level design and array of weapons. I was really beginning to get confident with programming at this stage and really wanted a task that would test all my capabilities up to this point. For this project, I took on a lot of the technical tasks. I set up the networking system using Normcore as our solution. I designed all the game modes, which were regular arena fight, the floor is lava, and king of the fish, as well as the game types, which were points, rounds, and timed systems. I designed the user interface for in-game, lobbies, and the game setup. I implemented the procedural object spawning based on seeds, and I did a bit of 3D modeling for the Colosseum itself in Blender. So a lot on my plate, but ultimately I wanted this to be something I look back on and was happy with what I contributed to it. But it was an amazing project to be a part of, and it was really cool to see it progress into its final form. So that concludes my games degree, and it was a great learning experience. But my biggest commentary, no matter what degree, your success is determined by your own commitment and dedication. simulation. And there were a lot of areas in my degree where I was still lacking, mainly my knowledge in data structures and algorithms. So while taking a gap year to just work on personal projects and unwind after university, I started a project called Ultimate Arcade. The original idea was to recreate 6 arcade games into a single collection that you could just choose and play, but was a project I never finished. I did, however, manage to complete Tetris and Pac-Man. If you remember earlier in this video, I made Tetris in uni for a project and relied completely on tutorials, but this one I created completely on my own, in a way that was pretty cool. Unity is a great engine, but it doesn't always enforce the best practices when it comes to programming. Tetris was created purely using 2-dimensional arrays, with the visuals of the game to only accompany it. The idea was that the game isn't reliant on the engine to play it at all. You can and should be able to play it in the console as it outputs the values of the Tetris board in real time. Over the next few months, I applied for a few jobs in game development, which had practical projects where you'd have to build things in Unity. The first of these was a recreation of Pong. I had about a week to complete this task, and I created it with my own predictive AI with multiple difficulties. This was a fun project to work on, but I got carried away after the submission with making the game look and feel nice. The next was Bug Join. Bug Join was a recreation of match 3 games like Bejeweled or Candy Crush. Again, after the submission, I got extremely carried away with the design of it and just had fun improving it. During this time, I also started exploring sort of neural networks and simulations in games, where I found The Game of Life by John Conway. I wanted to recreate this on my own, but with a bunch of twists to it. So I created an ecosystem simulation with fire, water, grass, dirt, trees, sheep, and snails. So these past few projects were also a nice way for me to not only develop my game development skills, but my user interface skills, which were definitely lacking at this point of my career, but more also just to keep boosting my own portfolio of projects. There were also a couple of projects that I worked on for the YouTube channel, like the head soccer recreation and the tower defense game clone, which ultimately led to the start of Guardians of Atlantheon, which I'm actively developing at the moment and have posted multiple devlogs on over the past few months, so feel free to check that out too if you haven't already. Before the grand finale, there was also a game jam that I worked on with 2 other developers, an artist, and a music and sound designer called Go Home. The theme for this game jam was role reverse. So we came up with a reverse Ghostbusters type game where you play as the ghost trying to scare the hunters out of the house by messing with the furniture. I was in charge of the character controller and the AI implementation in the game, and as buggy as it ended up being, was honestly hilarious to play with, and the game's got a lot of charm. All my years of game development lead to this. July of 2023, 10 years after I made my first ever game, I entered the game development industry. I've been working at a small Australian studio called Tin Man Games, currently working on a new title. The clip that I'm able to share is from the official Tin Man Games page, but we've been hard at work cleaning the project up, ready for its 2024 release. My role in the company is gameplay and tools programmer. So I assist all areas of development, from the game design to the UI, creating tools for their in-engine framework, or refactoring and optimizing code. I'm super grateful for my journey in game development, and although my passion for media still exists, I have been fortunate to combine the two through this YouTube channel, where I'm able to explore both my creative content creating side, as well as the game development side, into videos for you. As I wrap this video up, I just want to leave you off with a few words. I truly believe that no matter what you want to pursue, you have the capability. No one is too smart or too dumb to achieve what they want. If you have a passion for something, you get out what you put in. There's a saying, you can't make your 100th without making your first. Everyone starts somewhere, so start today. I hope you guys enjoy this video, and I hope you all stay safe over the holiday period. If you enjoyed this video and want to keep up to date with my continued journey, consider subscribing to the channel and let me know what types of videos you want to see next. Otherwise, thank you all for watching, and here's to our next 10-year journey.